What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 147. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm interviewing Dave DeCamp. He's the news editor at antiwar.com, news.antiwar.com, to check out all the great articles he's writing every day, usually 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes even more, of the most important things that the U.S. empire is doing around the world. So be sure to keep up with him. Today we're talking about on the show his coverage of the new Cold War with China, the Mercer Street attack, which was a ship that was attacked in the Arabian Sea. It's being blamed on Iran by the U.S., Israel, and its allies. Israel's making threats on it. So who actually carried out an attack and what could the possible response be? And then what is a Biden going to do in Afghanistan as the Afghan government continues to lose major cities and crumble? So ton of important stuff to talk about on today's show. Be sure to share the show. Find it at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show. We also post the show on the blog at antiwar.com, blog.antiwar.com. You can find the show on Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter for social media accounts. We post a video version of the show at YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. Check out the show, our sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com has a great collection of CBD products. I really like their topical. I use their sports cream most days. Rub it on, instant pain relief that lasts hours, 4 or 5 hours most of the time before I feel any bad pain again at all. So I highly recommend their products at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE, PEACE, and again, just tons of great products, and using the promo code helps the show and gets you a 25% discount when you spend $75 or more. Now let's get into the interview with Dave. What's up, Dave? How's it going? Welcome back to the show.
I'm good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, well, excited to have you back on. We got a bunch of your pieces from antiwar.com today to talk about, where we also have our fund drive going on right now. So anybody who wants to support me and Dave and Scott, Jason, Eric, and everybody at antiwar.com, so many great columnists we have writing right now: Dub Bandow, Ted Galen Carpenter, Danny Sherjan, Daniel Larison. I can't even think of everybody real quick off the top of my head. We got so much great stuff there right now. But if you do want to support us, head over to antiwar.com, and very easy to figure out how to donate. Got matching funds going on right now. But let's get into what's actually being written on antiwar.com, Dave. And we'll start off with this piece you have today. Blinken saying we need to pass this massive infrastructure bill in order to compete with China. And so it's not even a matter of, we have to improve the U.S. economy, but we're going to fall behind and start to lose if we don't pass this bill. So tell us what you know about the bill, and then, Blinken's statement.
Yeah, this was a speech that Blinken gave yesterday at the University of Maryland, and he was talking. He didn't, mention the bill by name, but he was saying how the U.S. needs to invest in infrastructure, or domestic renewal was how he put it, to compete with China and other countries. And this is kind of a common theme of the administration. Biden has said this before. His original infrastructure plan was about $2.3 trillion, which is just an insane amount of money. And, he said we needed to compete with China, and we're in a competition with China to win the 21st century. This is just like, these are the talking points coming out of the administration. It was kind of more of the same from Blinken yesterday. And then actually this morning, the Senate voted on the infrastructure bill. It's $1.2 trillion altogether. And it's a massive piece of legislation. I'm not totally familiar with it, but I know it includes $550 billion for, infrastructure stuff, transportation, rail, utilities, and stuff like that. And then the Democrats, they also have a plan for a $3.5 trillion budget that would allow them to spend on all sorts of social welfare stuff, paid leave and childcare, and just all stuff like that. So I'm not sure. I don't think that that's going to get very far. They just need one or two Democrats to be against the plan. But but yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how the Biden administration is framing everything in like the lens of, we need this to compete with China. And Blinken was saying, this infrastructure investment is the best way to advance our foreign policy. He said the Chinese and the Russians, that they're spreading these ideas that the U.S. is in decline, and spending, getting the government to spend a bunch of money on our infrastructure is what they think the solution to that is. And they put it in this framework that it's Biden has used this term before. He framed it as it's a competition between democracy and autocracy. So Blinken used a different phrase. He used authoritarian government to describe, China and Russia, and we're the, shining light of democracy here in the U.S. So yeah, it's just interesting to see how everything is put in this framework.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the real problems here, Dave, right, is that they're doing this on the infrastructure bill, and maybe it's just politics, right? Like maybe the Democrats think if they frame it this way, they could bully the Republicans into supporting it because the Republicans are constantly on the Democrats for not wanting to be hawkish enough on China. They want to spend more on the military and all the, and even though I don't think that's true or a reality, that is like the fictional fantasy land that U.S. politics takes place in, is that the parties accuse each other not being hawkish enough on China. And so this is now going to end up getting into the mainstream where they're just going to report things, Dave, like the Republicans are wanting to be soft on China right now at a time where you're writing up things and they'll mention this, like there's concern over China's nuclear arsenal, or China's expanding potential to take Taiwan, or in the South China Sea. They talk about all this aggression. And so I was wondering if you could update us on some of the things going on, more dealing with foreign policy here, like Blinken saying we have deep concern over China's nuclear arsenal, but I thought that nuclear arsenal was only about 300 nukes, which is fewer combined number of nukes than U.S. European allies, the UK and France have. So why are we deeply concerned about China's nuclear arsenal?
Well, yeah, so the estimates put China's nuclear arsenal at about 350 warheads, which is nothing compared to what the U.S. and Russia have, which they each have about 6,000, give or take a few hundred. But I mean, really, the reason why that Blinken is concerned with China's nuclear arsenal, a big part of the reason it's being hyped up in the media is because the United States, they need a enemy to justify all this military spending, and China is, the global boogeyman now. And there's a plan. The military has a plan worth over $1 trillion. I believe it could go up to $1.5 trillion to modernize each triad of the nuclear arsenal, ICBMs and land-based missiles and everything. And we've also seen these reports about China building missile silos in rural parts of China. And, these are just based on these satellite images, what look like holes in the ground. And then these experts say, oh, this is proof that China is massively expanding its nuclear arsenal. And there's reason to question these reports. One of them that was in the Washington Post, it said it was a wind farm nearby where the satellite image was taken. And it was even on the picture in the Washington Post that it was a wind farm. And some Chinese media outlets dismissed this and said, the picture was of like the foundation for more windmills. But interestingly, the Chinese government hasn't really commented on it. I think they want us to believe that they have more of a nuclear deterrent, or that they are expanding their nuclear arsenal, because they are, the U.S. is surrounding them and stepping up military activity in Asia. So they know how our media is going to kind of jump on all this stuff and exaggerate it, and how the U.S. is going to use it. So,
well,
yeah,
I mean, Could that be part of it too, Dave? Even if they are building silos, couldn't they just be empty? And I mean, the U.S. does have a nuclear policy called a nuclear sponge, where we have all these missile silos for the ground-based, Minuteman missiles. That our idea is that if nuclear war should break out, they would have to like target those rather than targeting cities with some of their nuclear warheads, right? So couldn't China be making some kind of similar strategic calculation? I believe, as the U.S. actually scaled down its number of nuclear weapons since the Cold War, some of the missile silos remain. And so the U.S. has empty missile silos, like laying around out there, that I'm sure, there's some ambiguity as far as which ones have the nukes in them and which ones don't. And, maybe China's playing some of the same game but anyways, it seems like the Hawks in the U.S. are certainly kind of feeding the narrative that works well for the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's the other possibility, is that they do want it to, to be a place where if a nuclear war did start, the U.S. would, attack these empty missile silos, or some of them could be real or whatnot. But, so, I mean, the thing that the United States and Russia should do, if they want China and other countries, France and the UK, to be involved in nuclear arms control talks like they say they do, is dismantle a good amount of their arsenal. So until they do that, China's not going to have any interest in participating in arms control talks. So all this hype and all these words that they have for China about them massively expanding their arsenal, which we don't even know if that's true. Even if the Hawks prediction is right, then they'll double their arsenal over the next 10 years, which would still be nowhere close to what the U.S. and Russia have. But on the other hand, you just need a couple nuclear warheads to end the world or destroy a couple American cities. So it is still a threat. I don't want to act like a few hundred nukes isn't a dangerous thing. It definitely is. But, for what the U.S. should do is dismantle its arsenal and enter talks with China. But that's not going to happen. That's not the purpose of all this. The purpose of all this is to inflate the threat of China, justify more military spending and expansion in Asia.
So, Dave, there's, I guess, a sense of the Chinese nuclear arsenal really shouldn't be a threat to the U.S. Maybe India should be concerned about, India should be concerned about that. Maybe Russia should be concerned about that. Maybe some of the neighboring states that have territorial disputes with China should be concerned about that. However, the U.S. is concerned about that because we apparently have U.S. admirals, including the head of Indo-PACOM, saying that the U.S. is ready and able to defend Taiwan. Dave, in one sense, I talked to my friends in the independent media, and everybody kind of knows that a war with, over Taiwan really isn't possible. But then the people that actually get to set the policy and carry this out, the generals and the think tank people, keep saying things like, we need to, reverse our policy on Taiwan, and we need strategic clarity. We need to make it clear to China that we will defend Taiwan with force. And then we have the military actually coming out and saying they're ready to do it. And it seems insane. So, what the hell is happening?
This is kind of you hear this from military leaders once in a while, that they say that the U.S. could defend Taiwan, because there is a big part of the Hawks. The talking point is that we need to expand in the region so we can defend Taiwan, and they portray a Chinese invasion as kind of not imminent, but an eventual possibility, or something that's going to happen within the next 10 years or so. But I mean, if you really think about it from both, angles, for the U.S. to defend a small island over in the Pacific, way over in the Western Pacific, against an invasion of a country as big as China, I mean, you would really need some serious resources in the region, which the U.S. has, but they want more. And so to say that the U.S. could defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion right now. I don't know if that's true. I mean, everybody has their opinions on it. There's these war games that have been conducted recently by the U.S. that said the U.S. would lose, but then again, those are used to justify the expansion and the spending. So who knows? But the thing that people have to understand too is Taiwan is, I just called it a small island, but it's a pretty massive island, and for China to take it, it would be like the largest amphibious invasion of modern time. It would be really hard for China to take the island by force, especially the population of 25 million people, if they don't want to join China by force. So the idea that China is going to invade it, that would be their last option, the worst case scenario, I think, for China. And I don't think that they want to invade Taiwan anytime soon, but the way that the U.S. is handling everything now and sailing warships through the Taiwan Strait more and having more spy planes buzzing around their coast and, arming Taiwan. The U.S. has armed Taiwan since 1979, but it's kind of more sensitive now, and the U.S. has taken steps to open up diplomatic relations. So that is making the conflict more likely when I don't think China would ever want to invade Taiwan, and Taiwan could be in a good position if they ever had to negotiate like a one country, two systems situation like Hong Kong. It would be different than Hong Kong because they're an isolated island and they do have they have a military. So, it's just not the situation that they portray it as. And, the more U.S. involvement in the region, the more likely a conflict is. So, but
right.
It seems like these people are willing to risk nuclear war for Taiwan, which is just, something that should be unthinkable, a war with China.
Right. Yeah, so I guess, you make a good point there that it's kind of the capability that Taiwan has to, use their military to inflict a lot of pain on China that would deter China from really even trying to go this route. But, the point I think a lot of people make is that when you look on a map and you look at the size of China and the military capabilities of China, if they decided we're going to war over Taiwan, there might not be a whole hell of a lot the U.S. could do, seeing how far away we're based, especially when you think of like missile capabilities. Now, I'm guessing the U.S. would have to destroy like missile sites hundreds of miles into China in order to, feel secure having U.S. personnel on the island when there is a war or something like that. So, you're talking about U.S.-China war, or U.S.-China war over Taiwan. And, if we're talking about U.S.-China war, that's a different thing. But U.S.-China war for an island just off the coast of China gives a pretty strong advantage to China when you're trying to figure out what's going to happen here. Kind of just like if the U.S. and like the Soviets went to war over Cuba, I would have to imagine that the U.S. would have been able to cut off the Soviet access to that island, assuming they didn't go in nuclear war first. But you're also writing up things going on in the South China Sea that aren't military necessarily. We're not talking about war games or anything like that, but the U.S. is constantly trying to make new deals or cut deals between their allies, sign new agreements, whether it's India, Indonesia, Australia, Japan, the Philippines, all these countries, Vietnam even, the U.S. is trying to increase all their ties with. So the latest one you have here at antiwar.com, Australia trade envoy seeks deal with India to tilt away from China. And I'm guessing there's some U.S. involvement in this. What all is going on here, Dave?
Yeah, so India, for the United States and its allies, they all kind of see India as kind of the key to containing China, or whatever their goal is, countering Chinese influence, however they put it. And now, so this is Tony Abbott. He's former Prime Minister of Australia, and he's now a trade envoy for Australia. And he was in India last week, and he wrote an op-ed after that said, they're trying to get a free trade agreement with India, and he described it as it would be the democratic worlds tilt away from China if Australia and India sign a free trade agreement. He called India a like-minded democracy. This is talking points coming out of Washington, and also even, you see this stuff in Brussels, NATO headquarters. They say the same thing. They have their eyes on boosting ties with India. Abbott said, basically India is the answer to everything China is India. If Australia put in the effort, Australian businesses put the same effort into India that they did in China, over the past few decades, then everything would be solved or whatever his idea is. This is just all part of the shift. And Australia is part of the Quad, which we talk about a lot. It's India, Australia, Japan, and the U.S. They're holding more military exercises later this year. And it's kind of the deterioration, because Australia and China, I mean, they're major trading partners. And it's just in the past couple of years that that ties have really just deteriorated. And now they signed a free trade agreement in 2015 that Abbott actually oversaw as prime minister, which is kind of interesting because you see how quickly these things shift. So the Australians, they accused China of violating the deal. Now China has put tariffs on some Australian goods and stopped importing coal and stuff. But China, for their part, they're doing this because of just the rhetoric that's come out of Australia, and how they're following along with the U.S. And you see there's this think tank in Australia that a lot of these accusations against China about the Uyghurs, about Xinjiang, and come from Australia. And Australia is part of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. It's another place where the U.S. has military bases. They want to expand. They want a new bases in the region, but Australia, I think they would like something a little closer to China than Australia. So Australia is kind of their fallback plan, I think, because they're ready and willing for a new U.S. base. It's another thing. India is just a big player in all this China stuff, and it's kind of scary because we know about that border skirmish that they had with China, and India has nukes too. Last June, there was the fight between Indian and Chinese troops on the border in the Western Himalayas there, in a disputed area, and about 20 Indian troops died. I believe China finally said 4 or 5 of their troops died. And those are two nuclear powers, and the U.S. has stepped up military cooperation with India since, signed a new deal to give them access to satellite data so they can keep an eye on Chinese troops on the border. So if like a war breaks out there, that's a U.S. proxy war in a way.
So I have some questions about that, because I think it has to be one of the fundamental problems for India is on the list of American concerns about China. Very, 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 very last, and the one that people can't probably understand and probably don't care about at all is the China-India border dispute. Intellectual property, Uyghurs, all that kind of stuff, no matter how true it is, Taiwan, Hong Kong, that kind of stuff. I feel like, there's some, like, people say in like just the general American public, I think, cares a little bit about those issues. But whenever you start talking about, what Aaron Margulies called the world at the top of the world, these mountains, what would an American care about it? Maybe India, that would have to, I think, be an issue for them. Is America willing to fight over their issues too? Because it seems like we really just care about the South China Sea stuff and all the more trade issues with the U.S.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, it's an issue I really, I'm not educated enough on, the history of their border dispute and stuff. And it isn't part of the talking points. Some of the hawks, like Steve Bannon or people like that, they mention India. He thinks India, I forget, he had a quote once. He said India is like the key to unlocking China or whatever, however he put it. So he thinks India is really important, and he's buddy with Modi's party and stuff. Um, but that's true from India's perspective. What is the benefit of stoking more tensions with your regional neighbor and allying more with the U.S. on the other side of the world? I don't know, but they are, joining in on it. They deployed some warships to the South China Sea. I mentioned the Quad. They all drilled together last year, and it was November 2020, in the Indian-led Malabar exercises, they're called, and Australia joined them for the first time since 2007. All four countries held exercises together, and that was India's decision to allow Australia. And both of them, not just India, but just very recently, were afraid to send the wrong message to China, and that's why this Quad was disbanded shortly after it kind of was created back in 2006, 2007. So now it's you just see this big unified push. So yeah, that's what it's just good stuff to keep an eye on, because where is this going to lead? If they want to isolate China economically, which would be really hard to do, because China is pretty much all of their top trading partners. So even Taiwan. So it's it's where is this going to lead? How far can this really go is kind of something I wonder a lot. But it seems like they're all determined to maybe eventually decouple from China, which is when a war could really happen.
So maybe we should move on here and start talking about Afghanistan, Dave, where the Taliban has had a major offensive. On the last show, me and Will talked about, I think they had seized 5 capital cities by the time we had recorded the show. By the time the show was published, they had seized a 6th, and I believe that's where they're at now. They control like 6 of the Afghan provinces. However, we are recording this
7th this morning.
Okay, all right, and we are recording this like 12 hours or so before it's published. So if the number continues to go up, anyways, through all of this, the Biden administration, at least publicly, they're not saying that we have to go back. Now they are increasing bombing. They're doing more in Afghanistan, but the rhetoric from the Biden administration is this is on the Taliban, and that we're still in withdrawal mode, and it's kind of full plan ahead on keeping with the withdrawal. So it doesn't seem like a sustainable plan at this rate to just keep 650 troops in the embassy in Kabul and continue to bomb the Taliban. It seems like at some point they would become Taliban targets, especially as the Taliban take more and more territory in the country. So Dave, what the hell is the Biden administration's plan here? I can't figure it out. I keep waiting, I guess, for him to backtrack on the withdrawal and be like, no, we're staying. We're not going to let the Kabul government fall. But here it kind of sounds like, at least from John Kirby, that's the Pentagon spokesperson, saying that there's not much the U.S. could do, and it's on the Taliban. So what's going on?
Well, yeah, the Taliban, with these major gains, in all the press briefings with the Pentagon, the White House, all the hawkish reporters are saying, like, what are you going to do? You're just going to leave the Afghan government? And John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman, he said to the reporters, he said it's their country to defend now. It's their struggle, is how he put it. And now, like you said, the U.S. hasn't stepped up airstrikes in recent weeks, but it doesn't seem like it's really doing much to stop these Taliban gains, and it's certainly not going to be enough to reverse them. So I think that's what the Biden administration is looking at. If they want to push back the Taliban, they would have to go back in, and you can't just send a couple thousand troops in. You would have to send tens of thousands in, and we know that no matter how many troops the U.S. sends, they can't beat the Taliban in a war in Afghanistan. And now there's currently, this is what all the reports say, about 650 troops, U.S. troops left in Afghanistan. They're mostly at the embassy in Kabul. And so now as August 31st approaches, which is the deadline Biden set for the withdrawal, it's not really clear. I think what they call the formal withdrawal is just about over. They want to leave these 650 troops in Afghanistan. They want to keep some kind of influence, and possibly they might continue airstrikes. But again, we just don't know. We're not going to know until August 31st. And I actually do think that there is a chance that they say, you know what, if the security situation in Kabul deteriorates enough, that they might just, pull the plug on that plan to keep the troops in the embassy, and the U.S. empire might really just be defeated here. Because it's not sustainable. I mean, everything has told us from this special inspector on Afghanistan reconstruction, the Seagar reports, he's been saying this whole time. If you leave Afghanistan, the Afghan military, they're not going to be able to sustain themselves. No matter how much money you throw at them, they need support from the contractors that specialize in these advanced warplanes and helicopters and stuff. And so I don't know. I mean, the U.S. has also said that if the Taliban takes over the country completely by force, that they'll isolate them, or that they'll be a pariah state, is how they put it. So I don't know what that wouldn't really do much. I don't think that's much of a threat to the Taliban, but we'll just see what happens in these next couple weeks, and it's kind of interesting to watch. I mean, it's really sad and horrible what's happening in that country. I mean, a lot of civilians are being killed, but the U.S. might just have to get out of there completely, and then see what happens when all the dust settles. And hopefully, Afghanistan doesn't plunge into a war that lasts, another 10 years or so.
Right. Well, I guess that is one thing. It seems to be going faster than even maybe the Taliban predicted. It was only a couple months ago they were saying that they are making gains, so quickly that they were trying not to take the provincial capitals. And then the Taliban said it was the U.S. airstrikes that provoked them into starting to take the capitals. I mean, what do you have an idea of how all this has gone down? I know the Hawks right now are trying to kind of point at the Taliban and say, oh, look, these are the people breaking the deal that they signed with Trump, but that seems like a real stretch to, it seems like blaming Iran for breaking the nuclear deal now. The U.S. has already violated and trampled on that thing. We stayed past the deadline. We've been bombing the Taliban, and so I just want, what do you think is kind of the way this has gone down?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what did happen. Biden did break the deal by pushing back the original May 1st withdrawal deadline, which the Taliban has accepted. Say what you will about the Taliban, they're not stupid. They knew well enough not to start attacking U.S. and NATO troops.
And still haven't, right? Have you read any reports of them hitting any Western, or even attempting to attack Western troops, or even Western NGOs? I haven't read really coming under attack. It's pretty much been a focus on the Afghan government and their people.
Yeah, no, they haven't. So, I mean, there could be truth to that the Taliban, because there was reports, Taliban spokesman saying that they were avoiding the provincial capitals because they didn't want to break the deal. Now it was a vague agreement that the U.S. and the Taliban signed, but there was annexes that said that the Taliban couldn't, march on any major urban centers and provincial capitals. But then, the U.S. did step up airstrikes pretty good. It was a few each day. And then all of a sudden these capitals fell. So they could have just been waiting outside these cities for the U.S. to leave and taken the opportunity to do it when the airstrike stepped up. But yeah, and, it's this offensive, it was almost inevitable that the Taliban would be taking over as the U.S. is leaving. But this major offensive didn't start until after May 1st, which is when the U.S. was supposed to leave. So if the U.S. was out by May 1st, there could have been a chance for a political settlement. A small chance, but there still could have been a chance. So by pushing back the deadline, Biden made it more likely that there would be all this fighting and violence and death.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could be even quicker than I had anticipated, but I do think the Biden administration is going to quickly come to the part of this war where it's either escalate or leave. Mm-hmm. And as you're kind of in agreement that you're not sure even the Biden administration knows exactly what they're going to do at the time. One very interesting thing that I've seen in all this, Dave, though, is the Hawks are now out saying we told you so on Afghanistan. This has infuriated me a little bit because they're claiming that we knew the government would fall when they left, and that this is their fault for leaving. But I mean, was there any indication that just a staying a little bit longer was going to change anything, or was the Afghan government basically fundamentally set to crumble as soon as the U.S. contractors left? Because then the one main advantage they have over the Taliban right now, it seems, is the Air Force, and the Taliban have neutralized that in a couple ways, but mainly it seems like it was the U.S. incompetency in building the Afghan military that has now made it non-functional.
Yeah, and I mean, for all those Hawks to say that, I just don't understand how that's an argument to continue the war when the U.S. has been there for almost 20 years and it's just been an utter failure. There's nothing to show for it. And every, educated proponent of getting out of Afghanistan, I mean, you read Scott's book, he was always honest about the fact that once the U.S. left, there would probably be a civil war and the Taliban would probably win. But that's just an example of the futility of the war. And even, at the height of the surge, 100,000 troops in the country, that didn't do anything. What are you going to, you could send the whole army in and they're not going to be able to win the war. So, it's the U.S. just has to pull a Band-Aid off and get out. And, it is like as frustrating as the Hawks are. I mean, they're just wrong and they lie about everything. So their opinion, unfortunately, it has too much influence in Washington. But what they say, doesn't really matter so much because they're dishonest and they have their interests.
Right. Well, Dave, I want to move on and talk about this story that's been developing. We discussed it a little bit on the last show. The Mercer Street was, I guess, there were really two attacks, I guess, on alleged attacks on ships in the Gulf of, or off the coast of Oman. One an attempted hijacking, and then one this attack on the Mercer Street. It seems like the attack on the Mercer Street is the one that's getting a lot more attention and condemnation from the international actors. Everybody is blaming Iran. When I had talked about last on the show, I don't think the U.S. had put out any evidence at all that Iran was behind the attack. Now they have released some pictures, and so what's going on here, Dave? And what do you think about the evidence? I believe CENTCOM put it out.
Yeah. So the Mercer Street, it was hit on July 30th by a drone, and it killed two crew members, a Romanian and a British national. So CENTCOM put this out last Friday, pictures of the hole in the pilot house on the ship and what they said was debris from the drone, and it was just like two pieces of fin and the stabilizer or something. And they said, oh yeah, this is proof that Iran did it because this is an Iranian drone. The fin just looks like the fins on the drones that Iran makes. So it was Iran. So obviously it's not conclusive evidence, but the U.S. is using this as proof, and they're joining Israel. They accused Iran right away before this so-called evidence was put out. So now Blinken was at the UN yesterday, and he said that the world should, respond and hold Iran accountable for whatever that means. Israel's been making more explicit threats. Benny Gantz, the defense minister, said that Israel is ready to attack. Iran denies that they were responsible for the attack, and even if the drone was made in Iran, it doesn't mean that Iran did it. There's plenty of groups in the region with Iranian arms that kind of have their own reason to attack an Israeli ship. And this is another strange detail of it, is that the ship kind of has a vague connection to Israel. It's Japanese owned. The crew members that died were Romanian and British, and it's managed by a UK-based company, Zodiac Maritime, I believe it's called, which is owned by an Israeli billionaire. So it's kind of a long way to go to attack Israel. And the timing of it is weird. Iran's new president came into office. I don't think Iran would be looking for an escalation at this time. And, all the media outlets, they portray it as part of this, what they call a shadow war between Israel and Iran. And there's been reports that said, and Israeli officials, speaking to media outlets, have admitted to these attacks. There's been Israeli sabotage and attacks on Iranian ships in the region since 2019, at least 12, according to the Wall Street Journal. So we know Israel's been doing these attacks. And Blinken's speech at the UN, he says, if we let them get away with this, we can't show them impunity or they'll do it again. But I mean, the hypocrisy is just, it's just staring you right in the face, because Israel is constantly attacking Iran, not just the ship attacks, but also inside Iran, and assassinating scientists and blowing things up at nuclear facilities. I mean, really dangerous stuff, and the U.S. never even acknowledges it. So yeah, it's just hypocrisy. And there's another strange report that I wrote about yesterday.
Can I just highlight one more thing on the Israel ship point? That not only has Israel been doing this, but especially under the Biden administration, a lot of the timing has been very suspect with the timing of U.S.-Iranian nuclear negotiations. One of the particular ships in the Red Sea was just after the U.S. and Iran announced that they would be holding indirect talks in Vienna. Israel then went and openly attacked an Iranian ship in the Red Sea. And it's unbelievable that the Biden administration pretends that this is something that's just happening with Iran, when Israel is doing it to Iran to undermine U.S.-Iranian diplomacy. It's shocking that they can't acknowledge that it's happening maybe both ways, which is why I'm somewhat suspect that maybe Iran was behind this, just because it would seem accurate and sensible retaliation. Not that necessarily makes it true, but it does seem like there's maybe some motivation there. If it were to happen, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised, as the U.S. and UK are waging a pretty severe economic war against Iran right now. There's a lot of reasons for Iranian motivation.
And Israeli airstrikes in Syria. I mean, they're constantly bombing Syria, and they kill these militia fighters that have, Iranian arms. I'm sure that they have some drones. And those attacks, they never go they're never answered. Israel bombs Syria with impunity about every week at a weekly rate. So to act so surprised that something like this happened, it's just such hypocrisy from the U.S. But a lot of Western media, they don't cover these Israeli attacks, only kind of the big ones, like at Natanz and the assassination of the scientist. Few people understand how aggressive Israel is in the region against Iran and its allies.
So let's get into who was behind this, because, again, they released some pictures, and then you wrote up today this story I found really fascinating, that the U.S. and UK special forces were, I guess, deploying to eastern Yemen. So this would be the area of Yemen that's not held by the Houthis, and I guess is largely either like ungoverned Al-Qaeda or held UAE backed government, Saudi backed government of Yemen territory. But they deployed 40 soldiers there trying to hunt these people down. So what the hell is going on, Dave?
Yeah, this is really weird. So this is from the British paper, or some consider it a tabloid, the Daily Express. And they reported that 40 British Special Air Service soldiers, SAS, arrived in eastern Yemen on Sunday to hunt down the perpetrators of the drone attack. and it said that they're working with U.S. special forces that are already there to train like some sort of Saudi commando unit. Now it wouldn't be a surprise if that U.S. special forces are in Yemen. We don't know for sure, but
Didn't when the AP reported about the UAE torture prisons in Yemen, they did mention that U.S. special forces were regularly coming to mainland Yemen from a ship ashore. So that does kind of fit in line with this, right? And
yeah,
that would have been this area of Yemen, Mokala, or one of those port cities in the east.
yeah, that would make sense too. And then there's also, I mean, when Trump first came into office, there was that botched raid that um, I'm blanking on their name now. The Yemeni family that Obama killed, and then Trump came in and killed the young
Alaki.
daughter. Yeah, that raid happened. So obviously there's special forces, or maybe there were Rangers that were in Yemen for that. And that war was going on. The U.S. war against Al Qaeda in Yemen in 2017. And 2018. It was pretty. There was a lot of airstrikes and raids. While simultaneously backing the Saudis against the Houthis. So yeah, I think if they're not, in the country at a, kind of constantly in the country, then they can get there pretty easily. So yeah, but the strange part about this is that this is the only report that I've seen that said the British believe the drone was launched from Yemen. They quoted a senior UK military source who said everything points to the drone being launched from Yemen, and it said that the U.S. and Israeli intelligence also determined that. So,
And
which is
then
kind of strange because CENTCOM, nobody else has said anything about that, and it's not really the Houthis. They're fighting their own war. Fighting has been raging against the Saudis, the U.S. Saudi coalition there. So I don't think that they would have a reason to launch a drone at a ship that's vaguely connected to Israel.
yeah,
So
and
it's
this
all, it's
was
all kind of strange.
just to add real quick, Dave, this was just this morning before we went on that CNN reported that a top DoD official confirmed that the attack came from Yemen. And then Idris Ali, who's the Reuters Pentagon reporter, says that the Pentagon spokesperson denied it. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting set of developments that the Pentagon is still denying that it came from Yemen, even though we're starting to see some leaked reports that that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else on this? Any idea of where this, goes from here? It doesn't seem like the U.S. could really come up with any more conclusive proof than they've come up with, like alleging that the rockets being fired are missiles being fired by the Houthi were coming from Iran, and also it seems like the Houthi might have a lot of motivation to carry out this kind of attack on their own, and even if maybe they did get this drone from Iran, that this wasn't just some Houthi motivated plot because 400,000 of their children are gonna drop dead this year, and nobody seems to give a crap. And so maybe if you do this, you generate some headlines, and people will be somewhat interested in discussing the war in Yemen.
Yeah, I mean that's possible, but I don't. I think they, like I said, they kind of have their hands full right now with the fighting the Saudis and the Saudi-backed government in Marib. I mean, airstrikes have been pounding Yemen, and they've been suffering some pretty big casualties there. It's just weird. And with this stuff, you just never know. And the U.S. just lies and omits information about it. I mean, if you remember back in September 2019, there was that big drone attack on Saudi Arabia on their oil facilities. And obviously they blamed it on Iran, but leading up to that, the Houthis' drone technology was getting a little better and better, and they were launching attacks deeper inside Saudi Arabia. And there's all this reporting on it. The Wall Street Journal had all these reports about how accurate the Houthi drones were and how far they can go. And then when that attack happened, that was just all off, out the window, and they just blamed it on Iran. It was the same thing. They displayed the drones and they said, look at this drone. It kind of looks like these Iranian ones. But they never proved anything, and we should doubt their narrative. Even the idea that it came from Yemen, I'm skeptical of that. So I think if it was an Iranian drone fired by one of Iran's allies, my guess would be it was one of the Iraqi Shia militias that's constantly being bombed by Israel. But who knows? It's one of those things we'll never know. Could have been Iran, but hopefully the reaction, I mean, I don't see the U.S. signing up for any big escalations against Iran right now, the way things are. But who knows what Israel could do.
Right. Or I guess they could just punish the Houthi in Yemen. Would be one option. There's really nothing the Houthi could do back about it. And they can make a big scene about it. Because the UK seems to, have decided that this is one of the cases where the person who died actually counts. At least one of them. And, something needs to be done about it. Again, there was a ship that was attacked off the coast of Syria, an Iranian ship that killed 3 Iranians. And there's no mention of it, that anywhere here. One other thing that I thought was really interesting that you wrote about, this out of nowhere report U.S. mulling easing sanctions on Iran in exchange for nuclear freeze. And so it seems almost like what you're writing here, Dave, is that after 4 months and 6 rounds of negotiation in Vienna to restore the JCPOA, we're going to throw that out the window and try to take a new path forward with Iran where, things that Iran, says are non-starters. They want to return to the JCPOA. They want to go that route with the sanctions relief and, not to do any of these piecemeal agreements, but now the U.S. is suggesting that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just based on a report from Bloomberg that cited, anonymous officials, but they say that the U.S. is considering options for if the deal isn't revived, and one of the options is, limited sanctions relief in exchange for a freeze on Iran's what they called most provocative aspects of their nuclear program, which means the uranium enrichment. So this is another thing back to Israel. Iran has increased some uranium enrichment to 60% in April when the talks first started because Israel sabotaged their Natanz nuclear facility. There was an explosion. And, this is when the talks in Vienna first started, clearly an attempt to sabotage them. And the U.S. could not condemn it or say it was bad or say anything about it, even when they were asked. So that was Iran's reaction to that. And when Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was killed in November by Israel, Iran's parliament passed a bill that required uranium enrichment at 20%. So that's why they did that. So I would guess that those are that's the freeze that the U.S. would want for limited sanctions relief. But yeah, who knows? I mean, it's not a good sign for the JCPOA. Iran's new president, Ebrahim Raisi, he, says he's willing to continue the talks. He has endorsed the JCPOA if the U.S. lifts sanctions. The EU, some EU officials said that they expect talks could start in September. But one of the reasons that this report said that the U.S. was considering these options is because of the tensions in the region in the wake of the Mercer Street attack. So maybe the U.S. knows something is coming, some kind of another Israeli attack that might make the negotiations kind of impossible and just like a temporary thing like this, or who knows? But I'm not very hopeful that the deal is going to be revived.
Yeah. I've been kind of leaning that way for a while now. It seemed like
Mhm.
the path forward with the deal was so obvious that if you're going to make it this complicated, you were just trying to kill it. Uh,
Yeah.
and now my concern is that if the Biden administration does this, it's going to be, and somewhat rightly portrayed as empowering the hardliner Rossi, right? Like if you had got under it and let this be Rouhani's victory, then he gets credit if this does improve the Iranian economy, assuming that's what happens when sanctions are removed. Now, if Rossi does it, he kind of gets to portray that maybe it was his hard line or more tough negotiations that got the deal done, where Rouhani was weak and look how we got taken advantage of. There's a really good article on this general thing that the U.S. has done throughout the history and how blatant the Houthis have been on this, that they like hardliners in charge in Iran because it makes it easier to portray the Iranian regime as they want. And so I really don't think there's a whole lot of interest in the Biden administration to get this done. Before we wrap up, Dave, I had just one last story from you that I wanted to talk about, and that's Iraqi militia say there will be an appropriate response if all U.S. troops don't leave. Any idea on what that appropriate response will be?
No, but I would guess, more rocket attacks and stuff on U.S. bases. So the U.S. and Iraq, and recently announced that the U.S. was going to end its combat mission in Iraq and withdraw. Well, actually, they didn't even say that they would withdraw combat troops, but the idea is they're going to switch their role from a combat one to an advisory role, even though it already kind of was an advisory support role as the way it was. But there's about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq. It's not clear how many, if any, will be pulled out under this plan. When it was announced, there's like all these reports, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, of U.S. officials saying there's not going to be a significant change in the number of troops. So this is a spokesman for Kateb Sayed al-Shuhada. They're a militia under the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, which is kind of an umbrella group of mostly Shia militias that formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. But the U.S. has kind of been waging this small-scale war against them, I guess, since the end of 2019. We've been bombing them. We assassinated their leader alongside General Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general that the Trump administration killed in January 2020. So they have plenty of reason to not want the U.S. in their country. And after Soleimani and al-Muhandis, who was the PMF leader, were killed, Iraq's parliament voted unanimously to expel the U.S. So it's obvious that to some elements in Iran's government, not just the Shia militias, but also the government, this plan to just change roles is not going to be acceptable to them. And this group, actually, the Kateb Sayed al-Shuhada, if I'm saying that right, the Biden administration has specifically targeted them with airstrikes back in February when Biden bombed Syria. That they targeted them and Kateb Hezbollah, blaming them for rocket attacks on the Erbil base with no evidence. There's a million people in Iraq that would probably want to fire rockets at the U.S.
Probably more than a
blame
million.
it on the Shia groups. Yeah. There's a million reasons why. So this is the same MO as the Trump administration. Just blame it on the Shia militias, bomb them, and start a little escalation, which led to the U.S. almost going to war with Iran. So it's really just reckless and pointless, the U.S. presence there. It's just a tripwire. And part of the reason why that Biden will not pull troops out of there is because they support the bases in Iraq support the U.S. occupation in northeast Syria, which they don't want to give that up.
Right.
Yeah, it just seems like it's going to be more of the same in Iraq. When they first announced this change, there was some other Shia, there's they're not a monolith. The Shia militias or the Shia clerics or the Shia politicians in Iraq. Some of them welcomed it and said, yeah, they can stay and help us fight ISIS, but no combat troops. So for some of them, it might be good, but for a lot, it won't be acceptable. And then there's also groups like ISIS that have a reason to kind of provoke a war between the Shia and the U.S. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the last question I have for you, Dave, was how can they leave Iraq? Because it seems like, they really want to keep the occupation in northeast Syria going on, but you already hit on that. So unless you got anything else on the Iraq situation, I'll go ahead and tell people where they can find your work and follow you on Twitter. It's at DeCamp Dave, right? Your last name's first?
Yep. Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter, readantiwar.com, news.antiwar.com, and give us some money. It's fundraising season. It's not fun to ask people for money, but we have to do it. We're totally reader supported, and we rely on you guys to keep us going.
Right. And again, I think Eric's got it up there right now, matching fund. So if you donate, it gets doubled, which is really helpful. And go ahead and do that now. That way we stop asking for money. And I really appreciate it. And Dave, thanks so much for coming back on the show. We'll do it again soon.
All right. Thanks, Kyle.